Imagine, just for a second, that you wake up, you blink, and instead of staring at your bedroom ceiling, you're looking through a windshield.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Right. You're sitting in the driver's seat of your car. You're parked in this massive, brightly lit asphalt ocean of a hospital parking lot.
Just completely out of nowhere.
Exactly. The engine is idling, and you have absolute zero memory of driving there. Like the last thing you remember is just being in your kitchen hours ago.
So the panic just instantly spikes, obviously.
Oh, massive panic.
Yeah.
But as you look down, you notice something incredibly strange about your hands. They are perfectly, calmly positioned at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel.
Wow.
Yeah. Even though you weren't there for the drive, some part of your brain was strictly following the rules of the road. Some deeply hidden mechanism, like took the wheel, navigated traffic, and kept you physically safe while your consciousness was completely offline.
Right. It forces us to confront this really terrifying but also kind of awe-inspiring reality of human biology.
Because we think we're the ones driving.
Right. Exactly. We walk around believing we are a single, unified consciousness driving the vehicle of our lives. But under extreme duress, your nervous system proves that's just an illusion.
Yeah.
There are backup systems. There are co-pilots ready to take over when the primary driver just collapses.
Which brings us to what we're talking about today. We are immersing ourselves in this truly mind-bending narrative that you, the listener, shared with us. It's a fractured experimental text called Signal Flesh Mathematics, void.txt.
Such a fascinating document.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to, tear into this incredibly complex text to explore the hidden architecture of the human mind. We're going to look at the mechanical ways trauma rewrites our consciousness.
And how we can actually live with it.
Yes. How instead of pathologizing the parts of ourselves we try to ignore, we might achieve something the text calls internal democracy.
Which is such a brilliant concept, because the text takes the clinical psychological reality of severe dissociation and it elevates it to a profound existential exploration. It doesn't just ask what happens when the mind breaks. It asks what kind of astonishing structures the mind actually builds out of the rubble to ensure our survival.
Okay, so let's unpack this rubble. Our entry point is a guy named Daniel Voss. He's 34, and that hospital parking lot scenario, that's his current reality.
Yeah, he's suffering from these massive episodes of lost time.
Right. So he walks through the sliding doors of the regional medical center, and the text just immediately zeroes in on the clinical atmosphere.
It's very sterile.
Extremely. The architecture, the fluorescent lights, his Dr. Chen, they aren't portrayed as healers. The text describes the hospital as like a processing plant.
Yeah, they're just running his blood work, checking his pupillary response.
Making sure there's no blunt force trauma to his skull, exactly. They're treating his missing time as a software glitch in an otherwise healthy machine. They just want a quick patch.
Which completely misinterprets the nature of his condition,
Totally.
The text leans heavily here on the author J.G. Ballard, specifically his concept of the psychopathology of technology.
Oh, right. Ballard wrote a lot about that.
He did. He wrote about how modern clinical environments are fundamentally incapable of measuring human trauma. So when Dr. Chen wraps a blood pressure cuff around Daniel's arm, she's using a quantitative tool to measure a qualitative horror.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. The medical system is trying to measure him with a ruler, but Daniel's problem is architectural. His mind is deploying an emergency exit because the primary room of his consciousness became totally uninhabitable.
The container is fine, but the inside is on fire.
Exactly. The system is measuring the physical container while remaining completely blind to the catastrophic reality inside.
It makes me think of loading a corrupted video game save file.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. You boot up a game, you expect to be exactly where you left off, but suddenly you spawn in a completely unfamiliar location. Your character is wearing different clothes, your inventory is full of items you never collected, and the game clock says you've been playing for 6 hours.
It's completely jarring.
It's terrifying. But looking at how the medical establishment reacts, treating this just as a malfunction to be corrected, I really struggle to accept that premise.
Yeah, I mean, they're missing the point.
Aren't they? Aren't they failing to see that this so-called malfunction is the precise mechanism keeping him alive? Like, if the brain didn't hit that emergency switch, the hardware would melt down entirely.
That is the central tragedy of that opening hospital scene, really. And to explain how Daniel's brain is surviving, the text introduces William S. Burroughs.
Okay, yeah. Tell us about his method.
So Burroughs famously used the cut-up method in his writing. He would literally take a pair of scissors to a finished page of text, slice it into fragments, and rearrange those pieces to create entirely new, non-linear sentences.
So he's revealing subconscious meanings through chaos.
Exactly. And Daniel's brain is basically performing a biological cut-up.
Meaning trauma physically alters how memory is even stored.
Yes. Under extreme stress, the brain's hippocampus, which is the part responsible for timestamping memories in a neat chronological order, it just shuts down.
So the memory doesn't get filed as a cohesive story.
No, it gets shattered into raw sensory fragments. You know, a smell here, a flash of light there, an unexplainable physiological panic.
Wow.
Consciousness is no longer a linear novel for Daniel. It is a shuffled deck of disconnected pages. The hospital calls this a malfunction, but Daniel's brain is actually masterfully hiding the worst pages so he can just keep functioning.
But okay, if Daniel's mind is a scrambled pile of pages, those fragments still exist, right?
They absolutely do.
And they have to find a way to leak out. If they can't communicate through conscious memory, they find another medium. Which leads us to Sable.
Yes, Sable.
She's a tattoo artist, and she runs a shop called Palimpsest.
We definitely need to define that word because it holds the entire thematic weight of the text.
Go for it.
So historically, parchment was incredibly expensive. Medieval scribes would take an old document, scrape off the original ink, and write a new text over the top.
But you can never scrape it off completely, right?
Exactly. The scraping was never perfect. The ghostly trace of the original writing always bled through the new ink. And that layered document, that is a palimpsest.
And Sable operates on the belief that the human body functions the exact same way. She translates pre-verbal, totally inaccessible trauma into physical art.
There's that brilliant scene with her client, Maria.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Marie comes into the shop, and she doesn't want a tattoo of the terrible thing that happened to her. She asks Sable for a tattoo of aftermath.
Such a powerful concept.
It really is. That heavy, suffocating blue sensation of surviving after the worst is already over. And Sable listens and translates that abstract weight into a geometric wave.
She physically drags the internal reality onto the external skin.
Exactly.
Sable is a cutter-up of flesh text, essentially. The hospital looks at the body as a machine, but Sable looks at it as an archive. The needle pierces the skin, but the image is designed to speak directly to the nervous system.
So people can look in the mirror and finally read their own obscured stories.
Right. She rearranges the visual narrative for them.
So these two incredibly guarded people, Daniel and Sable, they finally cross paths. But the setting of this meeting it's just fascinating to me.
It's very specific.
It doesn't happen in a coffee shop or a gallery. Daniel feels one of his episodes coming on, he pulls his car over, and Sable happens to park next to him. And they meet in the massive parking lot of a big box store at 9:14 p.m. on a Wednesday.
Yeah, just an asphalt ocean under glaring orange sodium lights.
Completely barren. And I kept wondering, why would the author place such a pivotal, deeply human encounter in the most sterile, corporate, unromantic setting imaginable?
Well, the location is actually the mechanism that allows the meeting to happen at all.
Really? How so?
The text references Burroughs again here, specifically his concept of turn day.
Turn day, okay.
Burroughs imagined folding Tuesday into Thursday to create an impossible, hidden third text. This empty parking lot at 9:14 p.m., that is turn day. It's a liminal space.
Like a transitional zone.
Precisely. Think about how strange and disconnected you feel walking through an airport at 3 a.m. or just sitting in an empty laundromat.
Oh yeah, you feel like a ghost.
Because these are spaces designed for movement, for commerce, not for existing. When you're in a big box store parking lot at night, the administered world isn't watching you. You aren't required to perform your societal roles.
So Daniel doesn't have to be the functional employee.
And Sable doesn't have to be the guarded artist. Because the environment demands nothing of them, their heavy psychological armor just drops, just enough to let them actually see each other.
And what Sable sees completely upends Daniel's reality. Because under those orange streetlights, she looks at his arm and points out 4 mysterious circular marks.
Daniel just assumes they're weird old bruises.
Right. But Sable, who spends her entire life reading the body's palimpsest, identifies them instantly. They aren't random. They are deliberate.
Something inside Daniel is literally signing its name on his skin.
It's the moment the horror shifts from the abstract to the totally undeniable.
Yeah, the missing time isn't just a void anymore, it's occupied. And whoever is occupying that time is trying to leave a message.
Okay, so to figure out who was leaving the messages, Daniel finally bypasses the hospital system. He finds Dr. Patel, a psychiatrist. And her approach is just a total paradigm shift.
Completely different from Dr. Chen.
Yeah. She doesn't take his blood pressure. She listens to him describe his fragmented timeline, and she says, "You're not uniquely broken."
Such a validating phrase.
Right. And she pushes him to stop running from his blind spots and start directly mapping his own interior.
Which introduces the framework of internal democracy.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, the traditional clinical instinct is often to try and fuse these fragmented parts back into a single identity, right? Treating the other voices as a disease that needs to be cured.
Right, like getting rid of the intruders.
Exactly, but Patel suggests the opposite. You don't eradicate the other voices, you pull up chairs and give them a seat at the table.
And Daniel actually executes this by leaving a physical blank notebook on his kitchen table before he goes to sleep, which is just incredibly eerie to me.
It's a leap of faith.
A huge one. He wakes up the next morning, and the notebook has handwriting in it that isn't his. And through this notebook, he meets Null.
Null, the ancient pre-verbal protector.
Right. Null is the part of the brain that kept his hands at 10 and 2 in the car. Null just manages pure survival. And then he also meets June.
June is the communicator. June is the one who actually drew the 4 circles on his arm.
Yes. And the detail June provides is what makes this internal democracy so incredibly vivid. June uses the notebook to share memories of Daniel's life at age 22, living in his first apartment.
Memories that Daniel's primary consciousness had completely walled off.
Exactly. June remembers that they had a constantly stuck drawer in the kitchen, and they named it Martin.
I love that detail.
They remember a radiator that clanked aggressively at 3 a.m., and they named it Marge. They watched an elderly neighbor across the alley for 2 years and called her Clara.
Naming inanimate objects, that's what makes this so haunting, really.
Haunting is the perfect word.
It implies a whole, separate, thriving inner life happening entirely without Daniel's permission.
It's like discovering you aren't the solo CEO of your own brain. You're just one member of a deeply opinionated corporate board of directors, and they have been holding executive meetings while you are asleep.
That's a great way to picture it.
But I have a major issue with how cozy the text makes this sound.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sitting around naming radiators sounds like a quirky roommate sitcom. Realistically, handing over the steering wheel of your physical body to alternate personalities sounds like a complete nightmare. It is a total loss of autonomy.
Well, the terror of lost autonomy is very real, but the text reframes it through evolutionary biology.
How so?
The author brings in Sherry S. Tepper's theories on compassion, specifically compassion as a strictly evolutionary survival trait.
Okay, I'm following.
Daniel has to confront the fact that his primary consciousness was simply too fragile to endure the reality of his trauma. Null and June are not hostile invaders hijacking the corporate board. They are the ultimate biological manifestation of compassion.
Meaning they split off to absorb the impact.
They step right into the blast zone. They carried the terror for 34 years, so the primary Daniel could go to work, pay his rent, and function in society.
Oh, wow. They were afraid for him.
Exactly. If Daniel tries to eradicate them to reclaim total control, he is killing the very parts of himself that kept him breathing.
That makes a lot of sense.
The unbroken version of Daniel, the guy who thought he was a single CEO, was actually completely alienated from his own history. Internal democracy means acknowledging that the people who saved your life deserve a vote in how that life is lived.
Okay, that radically changes the perspective. But the author doesn't let us settle into that comforting breakthrough for long.
No, they definitely do not.
Just as Daniel starts communicating with his parts, the structure of the text violently breaks apart. We get this whole section filled with bizarre meta-commentary.
It's a real shift in tone.
Yeah, these disembodied voices with screen name-like titles like PinX, Mark 43, and Anti-Pen, they literally interrupt the narrative to argue about the story itself.
It's a jarring structural device intended to mirror the disorientation of Daniel's mind. But it's also there to raise the philosophical stakes.
How so?
The text utilizes the philosopher Martin Heidegger here, specifically his concepts of authentic existence and being toward horror.
Heavy stuff.
Very. Heidegger argued that modern society provides us with scripts to follow so we can avoid thinking about the terrifying, groundless reality of existence, what he called the abyss.
And trauma shreds the script.
Exactly. When your timeline shatters, you are forced to look directly into the abyss. You realize how fragile the illusion of control really is.
So healing isn't just going back to the script.
No, healing is not a return to ignorance. Authentic existence requires learning to dwell alongside that horror without being consumed by it.
And this voice, Anti-Pen, aggressively objects to the very book we are reading. Anti-Pen yells at the reader, warning us not to treat this story as a neat, replicable self-help formula.
Right, because it's messy.
Extremely messy. Anti-Pen argues that recovery from this level of fragmentation isn't just about doing the hard psychological work. It requires an immense, unfair amount of luck.
Daniel is incredibly lucky.
Yeah, he's lucky his alternate parts are protective rather than destructive. He's lucky he happened to park next to Sable in that big box store lot.
All of those variables had to line up.
But I have to say, I found this tonal whiplash incredibly disorienting. We go from Anti-Pen screaming about cosmic horror and the abyss straight to a quiet scene where Daniel is sitting in his kitchen at 7:15 a.m., drinking coffee, and staring at a literal scratch in the wood of his table.
It's quite the contrast.
It is. How does staring at a piece of damaged furniture solve an existential crisis?
Well, it's actually a demonstration of the philosopher Simone Weil's concept of unmixed attention.
Unmixed attention.
Right. When Heidegger's abyss threatens to swallow you, philosophy won't save you, only the physical present can.
Oh, I see.
When Daniel looks at the scratch on the table, he isn't trying to interpret it as a metaphor. He knows exactly how it got there. He dragged a heavy box across it 3 years ago. He is giving the physical flaw his pure, unmixed attention.
So it's like weaponized mindfulness.
Yes, it is a physical anchor for a fractured nervous system, and crucially, it is the point of convergence.
Meaning what?
Well, Null knows the physical scratch. June can see the scratch and draw it. Daniel's primary consciousness remembers making the scratch.
So everyone's looking at the same thing.
Exactly. For the 4 minutes he watches the steam rise from his coffee, the internal democracy isn't arguing or negotiating. All the fractured pieces of his mind are focused on the exact same physical point in space and time.
They are surviving the void by rooting themselves entirely in the ordinary.
The ordinary as the antidote to the abyss.
I love that. And while Daniel is finding this physical anchor, the text shifts back to Sable. She has been watching Daniel map his mind, and she realizes she has her own sealed rooms.
She doesn't have dissociative identity disorder, but she has her own fragmentation.
Right. She left her home city at 19, running away from her mother.
And the text describes her mother's love not as abusive, but as a climate.
The climate.
Yeah, it's this overwhelming, suffocating environment with absolutely no boundaries. To survive it, Sable had to perform a highly curated version of herself.
Which takes a lot of energy.
It's exhausting. When she finally left, she locked away that terrified 19-year-old version of herself and built walls of sarcasm and artistic detachment.
But observing Daniel's internal democracy makes Sable realize she can't just leave that 19-year-old locked in the past. So she takes a train back to her home city to visit her mother.
And the text refuses to give us a fairy tale resolution here.
Oh, totally. Her mother hasn't changed. She still boundary stomps.
But Sable has changed.
Yes, she doesn't revert to the scared teenager. She actively integrates her past self with her present self, holds her ground, and says, "That's mine to decide, Mom."
She negotiates the boundary.
She does, and then she actually allows her mother to hold her.
She achieves her own internal democracy.
Which allows her to return to Daniel in the present tense, completely unburdened by her own ghosts. And then the text brings them together at the Marsden Street Market on a Saturday.
It's such a richly textured scene.
It really is. They buy terrible coffee from a vendor just for the ritual of it. And Sable finds a secondhand book with a cracked spine.
But she can't even read it, right?
Right. The text inside is printed in a language she completely cannot read, but she buys it anyway. And the imagery there is stunning.
It's very symbolic.
Buying a book, you can never read, feels like the ultimate metaphor for human connection. We spend so much energy trying to perfectly translate our partners, to figure them out completely.
We want all the data.
Right. But maybe real intimacy is holding the physical fact of another person's mystery, respecting the cracked spine and the history you weren't around for, without demanding it be translated into your native tongue.
Which is a direct refutation of the clinical opening of the story.
Oh, how so?
Think about it. Dr. Chen at the hospital wanted to translate Daniel into readable quantitative data.
Oh, right. The blood pressure cuffs and the eye exams.
Exactly. Sable buys the book precisely because it defies translation. She honors its existence just as it is.
That's beautiful. Which brings us to the final culminating act of the text. Daniel is sitting in Sable's tattoo chair. She is permanently inking June's signature, the 4 circles, onto his arm, reclaiming the space.
The circles evolve from empty bruises to actual vessels.
Right. So the first circle is filled with the image of the scratch on the kitchen table. The second contains the architectural map of his interior rooms.
The third contains the microscopic text from June's very first notebook entry. We know, we've been waiting.
And she leaves the 4th circle entirely empty.
Yep.
And I have to say, I found myself genuinely frustrated by that ending.
Really? Frustrated?
Yes. We just spent this entire narrative doing deep, grueling archaeological work in Daniel's mind. Leaving the 4th circle blank feels like an artistic cop-out, like a cliffhanger.
Huh?
Don't see how Chimerits, the characters, and the reader deserve some definitive closure after staring into the abyss.
I get that. But the text argues that the demand for definitive closure is actually a trap.
A trap.
Yes. A finished self is a stagnant, dead self. June specifically writes in the notebook that the 4th circle must remain empty. It is a monument to the ongoing.
Meaning the work never stops.
Never. The text completely dismantles the myth that healing means returning to the person you were before the trauma.
Because that person is gone.
Or they were an illusion to begin with. Daniel thought his unbroken self was his true self. But that unbroken version was a fragile performance that kept him alienated from his own reality.
Right, he was locked out of his own life.
The fractured version of Daniel, the man who communicates with his parts, who leaves notes for himself, who understands he's a multitude, that is the most authentic version of him.
So the empty circle isn't a cliffhanger.
No, it's the required space for whatever the democracy decides to build next.
Wow. Okay, so as we pull back from signal flesh mathematics void.txt, what is the core mechanism we walk away with?
Well, we are all palimpsests.
Every single person listening to this. You might not have extreme dissociation, but you have sealed rooms. You have stuck drawers in your mind you haven't opened in years.
We all do.
And you have earlier versions of yourself. Awkward teenagers, terrified children, fiercely defensive protectors riding along in the passenger seat of your consciousness.
And the clinical instinct is to evict them. But the evolutionary reality is that those mechanisms were acts of profound biological compassion. They absorbed the shock when you couldn't.
Achieving internal democracy means offering those survival mechanisms the same compassion they offered you.
Exactly.
So whether you are listening to this on a crowded subway commute, prepping for a stressful corporate meeting, or just trying to navigate a chaotic world, the text asks you to do something difficult.
It asks you to find the scratch in your own table.
Yes. To bring unmixed physical attention to the present moment and to stop trying to edit out the messy, fragmented parts of your history.
To let the ink of your past bleed through the parchment and recognize that the layers are what give the document its strength.
I love that. We'll leave you with this final thought to explore on your own. We've talked about the physical body as an archive, but think about your digital footprint.
Oh, that's a whole other layer.
Right. The internet is arguably the largest palimpsest in human history. Somewhere out there on a server, there's an old social media profile you abandoned a decade ago.
There are old avatars and games you haven't logged into since high school.
There are email drafts you never sent. Those are sealed rooms. They hold versions of your past self, frozen in time, continuing to exist in the digital void.
That's haunting.
So if you could somehow open a chat window and message those abandoned digital versions of yourself today, what do you think they would say about the person you've become?